start. So, okay, hello everyone. So glad to see you all and welcome to Anthropology Day 2020, or I should say Anthropology Days, I guess, as it's a 2 days event, 2 evenings event. And so today is the first day and we will have Artūrs, who will give us workshop on applied anthropology methods. But before to start, I would like to tell shortly about this year's topic, which is social action. And so this Anthropology Day is part of a bigger project in 3 Baltic states, Social Science for Social Action. And the project is coordinated by us, Antropos, and organizations taking part are research organization from Latvia, Jaunradas Laboratoria, and 2 student associations from Estonia in Tartu and Tallinn. So Estonian Anthropology Association and Tartu NEFA group. And we all met last year in Kaunas to engage in discussion around good practices of how can we apply anthropology, whether it would be applied anthropology, engaged, public, or any other name. But the goal was to see where is anthropologists or any other social or humanities scholars place outside academia. And so this year we have workshops and discussions on social action. So we organized this event thinking about us and about our colleagues, fellow students and recent graduates, academics, as we think that our study programs have presented us with a broad range of social and structural issues of contemporary. However, we need tools and skills to address those issues we research. So this year and today we are organizing workshops to exchange knowledge and especially skills and tools, how to do change. And similar events will be happening in Latvia and Estonia as well. And so today we have Artūrs, who will share his experience and knowledge on applied anthropology methods. So we think that applied anthropology and applied methods could add huge value into public, NGO, and private sectors, particularly qualitative methods and insights. And so tomorrow we will have Ekaterina Lavrinets, who will share her experience and path from community engagement to advocacy. So join also tomorrow. And after all, we will have discussion about knowledge about change and knowledge to change with Kristina Jonutite, Roberto Barrios, and Ekaterina Lavrinets. So, it is interesting that this project have started almost 1 year ago when we met first in Kaunas in November. And the topic, and now this topic of activism, advocacy, and action became even more important, especially today with things happening, I guess, in Belarus and recent things happening in United States. So we think it's important today to have those discussions about academia and social action as well in a new context. So, well, I'm sure there's going to be very interesting 2 days and these 2 events. But so let's start with applied methods, and I give word to Daina to present Artūrs. So yeah, I will mute myself as I have dog here who snores a little bit.
Hi all, and thanks Ugne. I think before presenting Artūrs, I will also present my colleagues, so Ugne Barbora Starkutė, Dovilė Valkauskaitė Gaižauskienė, and Cornelia Čepytė, because this is actually the Antropos crew, and we're organizing this whole thing together and doing a pretty nice job of collaboration and learning from each other a lot. I'm just gonna say a couple of things about Artūrs. I met him in one winter school in Tartu University. I think in 2018, and now I'm happy to say that for a couple of years he's been a doctoral candidate in the University of Tartu in the Department of Literature and Cultural Studies, right? And he's also a lecturer in University of Latvia, where he's teaching a variety of subjects from moral anthropology to ethical issues, etc. And as far as I know, you were teaching some methods things in Tartu University last year as well. So we've thought to invite you here because I know that you're working a lot in the applicability and the applied projects concerning various social issues. And I know that most of your research is in issues of your personal research in structural and institutional violence. And I know that you're going to, expand a little bit on that maybe as well. And just a technical point for all of us, if you have any questions during the presentation, which is going to take around 1 hour, please write those questions in the chat. You can find the icon for the chat window at the bottom of this whole Zoom meeting page. And if Artūrs sees them during his presentation, he might answer to some of them. And if not, I will share it with him via voice later after the presentation is finished. However, after the presentation, we will have time for the questions and answers. So if you have things that you want to address directly or to voice them, be it questions or concerns or ideas, please feel free to ask them in any of these two ways that are comfortable for you. And I see Cornelia has a technical point as well.
Yes, if something happens to Zoom and we will lost connection, just connect the same link. It is the same link for every day, for both days. So yeah, let's reconnect the same link.
Thank you. And I think I can give the floor or Zoom to Artūrs, and good luck and thank you for coming here.
Yes, hi everyone. I hope you can hear me well. I'm honored to be here and to share my experience on applied anthropology. Yes, the first thing I wanted to say is that if tomorrow, what I see from tomorrow's workshops and lectures, you're going to be talking more about, as Ugne already mentioned, how to connect social action and academia, and what are the implications of these two things, and this joining of these two things. Then today, this is more of a practical approach. This is more of so you want to do applied research. How do you actually do that? What are the methods? What are the steps you need? So not an extended theoretical or discussion or about the moral implications of being applied researcher. For that tomorrow. Today, really just the practice. And so I will start sharing my screen so I can show you my presentation. Yes, we are not going to have a very interactive workshop due to Zoom and all that means, but as Diana already said, there will be space for questions. Now, applied anthropology in Latvia is in a very strange space in a way, because on the one hand, we are always doing applied anthropology just for the reason that university doesn't really pay us. So we need to make money somehow. So I have been doing applied research for several years now. But I've never really thought about it as activism because it's more of well, I need money. At the same time, the topics that I have been researching, as I will introduce you soon, have mostly been about, as Diana already mentioned, about topics that could certainly be seen as activist topics. But we can have that discussion later. So in this presentation, then first I will talk a bit about how applied research works in Latvia, what I have learned from it, and what are the few intricacies that might be useful, hopefully also to people living and working elsewhere. And after that, I will go into the methods that we usually use, which methods at which point and why. And after that, questions. Yes, so yeah, my experience. Each of these projects that I mentioned is there for a specific reason. because each of them show a different side of what applied research has been for me, but it will be quite text-heavy slides, so prepare yourself. So the first one, this was one of the first applied research that I did, and we carried it out for SPKC, which is the Disease Control Center for Latvia. And the question they were concerned with was, well, how ready are we to, receive refugees, as they called them at the time. And it was during the time when everybody was very worried about that. I start with this one because it's one of the first one I participated. And for each project, there will be, you see there's the time frame, how much time we had for it, and what was the stuff that we actually did. And for this one, what you can already see, we only had 2 months to do the research. Now, if you come from university with and had a very academic training in anthropology, you might think, oh, anthropological research, that goes on for years, right? No, applied research, most likely those are months. In this case, we had just 2 months, and we ended up doing 32 interviews. And what is also special about this one, we ended up with some bit of participant observation. This is, I think, one of 2 instances in my experience where I've got the chance to do that. I don't remember if we actually got paid for it, but at least we had the chance to do it. The next one is this one. This one is for Ministry of Welfare, and this is again shows yet another side of applied research, meaning that sometimes you are thrown into projects which aren't necessarily yours. In this case, there was a team that tried to do the research. They kind of didn't succeed for various reasons, and then we jumped in and tried to take over and help deal with the whole situation. That made the project rather difficult. We had to work with data that was not our own, and it was a very, very challenging situation. And as you can see, it was planned to be 3 to 4 months long, ended up being 6 to 8 because of extension that we got to kind of clean up the whole thing. Here we did a lot of secondary data analysis, desktop research, interviews, focus group discussion. I will talk about each of these methods in detail later in the presentation. The next one is the one where we needed to see how prevalent are process addictions in Latvia. Process addictions are, gambling and the issues connected to excessive playing of computer games and excessive use of social media. And this one I show because here again, there were certain lessons that I learned, such as for this particular research project, what we needed to do was to negotiate with Ministry of Health, for whom we were doing the research, that we are probably not going to do what they want us to do. Because what they wanted us to do was to find how very prevalent is, let's say, gambling addiction, and how prevalent is addiction to computer games, how prevalent is addiction to social media. The issue at the time is that the last 2 didn't exist. There was no diagnosis addiction to gaming. There was no diagnosis addiction to social media. We couldn't find it. There was no methodology for it. There was no conceptual frame because these things were something that people in their moral panic had made up, but that didn't necessarily exist. So in this case, we needed to talk to our contracting entity and explain to them that we're probably not going to call it addiction because it's not addiction. We cannot prove that. So that's again a very specific case and specific things that we needed to do. But we had 5 months. That was a lot. I enjoyed that research because of how much time we got. Then this is our current project that is going on right now. Our whole department is involved. Whole department means like, I don't think even 10 people, I don't know. But it's not like a lot of people, but all anthropology department in University of Latvia. And here we got funding for 3 years of research. This is exceptional, and it's important to note that this is not something that can be expected. For most cases, if you carry out applied research for any clear purpose, you won't have that much time. This is when you get funding from some institution or some state funding for a research project that you really want to do, and if there are some grants available. In our case, it was the Latvian Science Council who funds these projects from time to time. And so we applied and we got funding for 3 years to research, with the name Anthropological Perspectives of Violence. And this is our biggest project yet. As you can see, we have done quite a lot of interviews, quite a lot of focus group discussions, also some observation, and a little bit of participatory methods as well. So this is the biggest project we have, and in that sense, I also wanted to include it. And finally, I include also the work that I have done together with SOS Children's Villages, because this is an example, at least for me, where you find an NGO who like you and you also like them, and then you can carry out a repeated project. They need some researcher, they need some expert, and they come to you because they know you, they like you, vice versa, and then you have some, well, not stable employment, but you get some money from time to time, and it's nice, and it's nice people, and they are interested in important things. So I will talk about each of these researches a bit in detail once we get to the methodology, but these are the main projects that I will be discussing. And if you are interested in any of these topics, or in any of our student projects that have also all been applied, then let me know, write in the chat, and I can then also later maybe share some of our research, reports if they are in English, and then tell you a bit more about all that. So yeah, student projects, as you can see, we have research healthcare in Latvia. Then last year we did youth perspectives on cyberbullying, and this year we did obviously something on COVID-19 crisis in Latvia. Now, how does it all come to be? If you're living in Latvia and you really want to do applied anthropological research, how does the whole process happen? Well, there is no one clear formula. That being said, here is formula. First, it all starts with a technical specification for open tender. So there's an open tender, the ministry, or usually it's a ministry or NGO, just kind of announces that they have a research, that they want to do some research, and they think that, and we think that we could maybe apply. So you find this tender, you start reading this technical specification, which will be the most important part in Latvian case. Because technical specification is the part that will tell you what exactly they want you to do, how they expect you to do it. And I think that's also the part where they tell you how and how much. Now they tell you in a different place how much they're going to pay you for. But this is where you get all the details, what you need to do and how you need to do it. Once you have that, and you have proven and you have applied for it, you have written your proposal, you can get a contract. And once you have a contract signed from both parties, then you do the research, which here is shown as a running man, because that's more or less how it feels. If you have 2 months to do a research, you feel like you're always running. Assuming that your run is successful and you don't collapse along the way, this is where you write your research report and you get money. This is like the simplest way how to describe it. Everything seems fine, right? But at the same time, this doesn't really tell people much what exactly happens. How exactly do you get from here to there? For that, there are the next slides. So first one, starter kit. What do you need? What do you need to start a local research for state or for business? So first of all, you need to know where to look for research, and you need to know how to actually do it. These are 2 important points. First one, you need to know what are the places where open tenders are published. In Latvia, there are certain links you can go to. In Lithuania, I'm sure there are also some. I don't know about Lithuanian, haven't never applied, but I'm sure that Daina or Ugne can tell you where you find these. And the other very important thing is, what do you want to research and what can you research? This point is important because I really, really like physics. I don't understand much of it, never studied, but I really love it. But I can never apply for a research project in physics because I have no idea what's going on. Therefore, you need to be aware what your skills are, what your capacities are, and only after that you can start thinking of which research projects to apply. Because there are always some tenders open, but they're very often, let's say, for natural sciences, or they're open for, I don't know, psychology. And if you're an anthropologist, you can't really do that type of research because you simply don't have the tools. Don't apply to research that you don't know how to do. That never ends well. Okay, so you have found the tender, you have understood what you can do, everything looks good. What's the next thing you need? The next thing you will need is team. Yes, applied research is usually greater in scale than academic research done with, let's say, a study course. and therefore there usually needs to be multiple participants. You need several people to do the volume of work. And also there's other issues why you usually have more than one person doing the research. And these several things that you need to consider are here now on the slide. So the first one, you usually will need some kind of degree. In this technical specification on the standard, there will be information. For ministries and government agencies in EU, most likely they are going to expect at least a master's degree in relevant science. Relevant science might be social sciences, humanitarian sciences, depends on the research you're interested in. And then it's your very creative approach, sometimes how to convince them, yes, my degree is what you're looking for. For that reason, in Latvia, well, not only for that reason, but it really helps. In Latvia, the study program for anthropology is called Social and Cultural Anthropology. That really allows us to both apply to projects that are for cultural studies and for social studies, because we are both. Anthropology obviously is both, but you need that to have that in the name to kind of convince state officials that that is the case. The next thing that they are going to look for, even if you do have the degree, you just finished your university with the, a distinction, everything is awesome, but you don't have the experience. This is again going to be an issue because they are going to ask, well, okay, we are going to pay you now, I don't know, 40,000 euros to do this research, but you have never worked with such a large research. Last research you did was your master's thesis, which you did really on coffee and 5 euros. So how are you going to manage this amount of money? And the answer, and therefore you might again not be applied. And this is why you very often need some experienced researcher with you who can show, yes, I have worked with large scale projects and I have this expertise. Again, this is why you end up working in a team. Plus working in a team is way easier sometimes. But how do you get this experience in the first hand? Well, try to apply to projects as an assistant, even while you're studying or before you have an experience. If you cannot be the researcher, you can be researcher's assistant. You do something. And after that, just include that all. During your study courses, you took part in this one research project where you transcribed an interview. Great, write that in your CV. You participated, you know what you're doing. Just try to present your experience as large as possible, and that should help you. Now, the next one, and this is crucial, I will return to this several times, willingness to work together. I cannot stress enough how important it is to have a good team, good in the sense that everyone is willing and able to work together. Working together this is why when you are making your team, when you're looking for people to work together, do look into, if you don't know the people, do try to meet them beforehand. Do look how they have worked before. Because if your working styles will be very different, if your ideas of what is quality will be very different, you might run into quite a lot of trouble later on. When you understand that for you, it's super important that everything is perfect, and for the other person, it's super perfect that everything is done on time. This is, by the way, is the usual point of contention. Somebody wants it to be perfect and someone wants it to be on time. And these two people are usually clashing. That's me and Carl's in our work. Carl's being my colleague. But okay, so you got your team, you know you can do your research. So where do you go from there? What's the next thing you need to consider? Next thing you need to consider is what are the payment prospects? This again, I cannot stress enough, is very, very important. Because for many of research projects, at least in Latvia, you get paid once the research is done. You do not get paid during it. That means that, let's say you're lucky and you got a large research that will, take 6 months. Awesome. At the same time, these are 6 months during which you will need to do research. You need to eat and live somewhere, pay for all that in modern capitalist society, and you're not getting any money from what you're doing. So this is something to consider, something to always keep in mind when you're looking at how the money is going to be paid to you from the contracting entity. Are they going to be paying you every month? Are they going to be paying you during according to some time schedule, or is it all coming at the end? And so you do not get into too much debt while you're trying to make money. So this is another point that you certainly should not discard, because it might derail your research for a rather seems mundane reason. Okay, so when you're getting your money, you have your grandmother that will send you food so you can do the research, you have your crack team of specialists, everything is going fine. That's when you return to the technical specification and start writing down all the things to prove to the people who are hopefully hiring you that you are the correct team that will be able to do the research. Once you have succeeded in doing that, you can we again come to the happy end here being the contract. And once you have the contract, you can start working. So far, this is the introduction, but this is just the introduction. This is the whole thing you need to do without getting paid for it at all. This is the whole thing you will do. You will apply for the research and hope that you get funded. If you don't get the research, this all was wasted. So do keep in mind not to apply too much or too often, because that also takes quite a lot of effort. But we will talk about that in a second. Okay, woohoo, we got the starter kit done. Where do we go from here? Well, that's a good question. I will talk about specific methods in the second part of this presentation. But yes, once you have the contract, that here is, the handshake here represents the contract. This is where the actual things start to happen, where you start doing the actual research, interviewing people, media research, deciding on and reaching research participants. Sometimes for Latvians, so Latvia's, the capital of Latvia is Riga, for those of you who might not know. And this is a thing that sometimes, again, young researchers don't consider. You will have to leave Riga sometimes. That means you will need transportation. Do you have it? If you don't, are you okay with going on the public transport? Does it even go there? If it doesn't, can you rent a car? More importantly, can you drive? So again, all these things you need to know before starting research, because afterwards it will be a bit too late. For me, I would always advocate for using public transportation. Obviously, there's environmental reasons, but it's also because you have way more time. You don't have to drive. You have time to just sit down and write your field notes. Plus, you might meet someone on the bus who might be important for your research. You never know. I've witnessed fascinating things on buses, so I can wholeheartedly recommend taking bus to everywhere. And another thing you will always need to know, keep in mind, is that as you see here, there is constant organizational communication. There are organizational meetings, and there are progress meetings. Especially if you will work with the state agencies, at least in Latvian case, there will be constant checking on your progress. And this is, again, a very specific mode of communication that you will need to learn how to participate in. Where you go in, you listen to how they ask why you haven't got the results that you promised by Q1, and then you explain, and then you talk about it, and then everything is fine, and then you do that again in a week. This is, again, a thing that takes quite a lot of time. You should plan for that. You should be aware that that's going to be there, so it doesn't cause a surprise. Yes, and once you've got through all of this stuff, then you finally do create what is called in Latvian nodevums, and the final report, final compilation, and then you give it in, and you hopefully get the money, and you're a happy man. That's essentially how, because I will talk more about methods extended later, I'm not doing that much about it here. Now, before I go to the next slide, I can't really see your comments, chat if I have a full screen, so I will probably answer to everything at the end. Just like that.
I think that's fine because there are no questions at this point.
Okay.
Or
okay.
Not any as I see.
Okay, thank you. I will assume that's encouraging and not discouraging. Moving on. Now, this slide I thought about it a lot, but I decided to leave it in. As you can see, this and the previous three slides and the next one are created by my colleague Christian Zalans for a different presentation. I have just adjusted it for this occasion. I work with Christian a lot. He's an awesome researcher and does a lot of applied stuff. And yes, I left it in. This one is, as I said, I will talk about these nitty-gritty details of doing practical research, of doing research practice, of doing applied research, doesn't matter. And these are the things that you should be aware once you start doing. And so first one, group work is everything. That I cannot, as I said, I cannot overstate it. For me and Carlos and Christian, that is the usual team that works together. We have gone through many iterations of how to make it work better. Carl strives for quality, I strive for doing everything on time. We fight and then everything is fine in the end. But you need to figure out how you're going to work together, because otherwise nothing works. Next one, cynicism and sexism. You could add racism here, nationalism, all kinds of horrible things. It's not about you as a researcher or other research, it's about the field that you will be in. Many people you are going to be talking to might be very, very mean. Not necessarily towards you, maybe towards some other people. But this is something that you need to know. There will be quite a lot of emotional labor. There might be, if you're researching a nice topic, maybe not. But there might be quite a lot of emotional labor to kind of get through all you kind of learn through research. And as this is not the classical anthropological research, where you go into the field, you get shocked by how horrible it is, then you go away for a while, rest, and then you go back, right? Can't do it. You don't have the time. So you swallow it and keep going. Here, my most, I'll try to be brief. My example here usually is this one nurse. I had to interview her for this project that we had about how prepared Latvia is for refugees. And she was horribly mean. She was openly racist. And she kept telling such awful, awful things about how bad people refugees are and what should be done to them and all these things. And I remember sitting there and thinking, this is it. It doesn't get worse than that. And then she went out, got another nurse, and then there was two of them telling me how horrible all the refugees are. So that was hands down the worst interview I've ever had. But these things might happen, and people might be quite jaded. People can be quite sexist, and it's just something you need to know, and you need to know how to deal with it. Otherwise, again, your career is going to be quite short. Next one is a nice one to kind of overset that. People will say that you have a cool job because you're a researcher. You go out and you research things, and everything's awesome. So that is a good thing. Next one, especially if you're working with ministries, they are quite attentive to details and formulations. So if you wrote that you're going to be doing 27 interviews, and you wrote 27 because you like the number 27, you will have to do 27, not 26, not 28. You're not going to be paid for 28. And you will be asked, why do we need to pay you the amount of money you asked if you only did 26? Everything will need to be to the detail, completely correct. And if it's not, you will have to explain why that is the case. This is something to especially take into account when working with ministries. There is a joke about it, but it's mean, so now let's move on. Okay, next one. In Latvia, if you work as a researcher, you're very often self-employed. That means you need to learn how to pay taxes on your own. I don't know if that's the case in Lithuania, but in Latvia, if you research, then you're a self-employed person. You need to know how to do your own taxes. That comes as a horrible surprise if you didn't know that was going to happen. Taxes are, taxes. Next one is the most what's the right word? Most controversial one. I don't know if that's the case in Lithuania. I don't know if that's the case anywhere else outside of Latvia. I assume it is. But even in case of open tenders, even in case of these competitions for research projects, you might come across some level of corruption, especially in Latvia. Not especially in Latvia, but in case of Latvia, it sometimes happens. What that means in this case is, you read the technical specification, you read the tender, and you understand, damn, this is a very specific thing. I think we could apply, but it seems weird. You should inquire. There might be the case that this particular research is going to be done by a particular research group. That is not you. Now, you can argue about it, and I invite you to do so if you have the time and the money. But if you're simply looking for a place for research, be aware that these things will happen, and certain researchers you will have to skip. There's no point of applying because you cannot win. Now, that's kind of a crappy thing and probably not a good thing to say about Latvian research environment, but it's something you should know before you get burned by spending a lot of time of crafting beautiful research proposal, and that never goes anywhere. A next thing that is rather controversial, but unfortunately true, in research practice, you will have to make peace with the fact that, as we mentioned, cynicism and sexism is quite widespread in the field sometimes. That also means that sometimes you will need to send the right person to do the job, and not because that person is the most qualified. There is a ministry in Latvia where the people who work there really prefer to talk to young males. That's how they see it. They really think young males are the best people to talk to, and they are very suspicious of older women. And therefore, usually I would be sent to that ministry to ask questions. We're not talking about which ministry, that's irrelevant for now. But yes, these are the things you will learn as you go. But remember, there will be times where some people will expect you to buy cakes and some people will expect you to be of different gender. And sometimes you can work around it and sometimes you just have to deal with it. Same thing about the next one. Sometimes someone screws up and you just sit there and you pretend that everything is fine. I'm sure that in today's project-based life, everyone knows how to do that. So I'm not going to talk a lot about it. I've done it. I've been both the one who sits and pretends everything is fine, and I've been the one because of whom someone pretends everything is fine. The thing I learned is never promise what you cannot do, and never say that you're not going to do what they're asking of you, just explain why they actually don't. So those are the things that I learned in this. And yes, the last two, again, staying up late or having sleepovers because you have to do the work and someone else did do it, that's if it's bad teamwork, or it's sometimes just because the time frame was actually unrealistic. Talking about unrealistic time frames, this is the last slide before we go into the methods, I promise. Talking about unrealistic time frames, here is things to avoid. Don't be late. Don't do spelling mistakes. These two things will just these two things really affect your research process. They really affect what your contracting entity thinks about you, and there's nothing good that comes out of this. There's no point of heading in perfect research report if you do it months late. No one needs it. They need it when they need it because they have their own bosses and their own issues. So do it as good as you can and give it in. But again, as I said, I'm the one who always is worried about being late. So there's that. Obviously, don't lie or mislead the people. Don't lie to people. Don't mislead people. Should be evident. But yeah, if you think that's going to work, if you think you can make up an interview and then everything will work out, it doesn't. It's, again, a self-evident thing, but maybe worth mentioning. Yes, I already mentioned unrealistic expectations of time frame is bad. And always remember that even if you have to work a lot and you have to talk to very, very awful nurses, try getting these resources where you can, try getting rest where you can, and do not get rude. Because that is a thing we also can see. People get rude to each other, they get rude to the contracting entity, and that really, really doesn't help anyone. So remember, be nice. That's a thing also. Now, finally, I get to talk about the methods themselves that we use, and I don't think I even have that much time for that, and I'm sorry about it. So I will quickly talk about this. So usually when we talk about initial planning of research, we're talking about you select the research problem you're interested in, you formulate the research design, you collect the data, you analyze it, interpret it. That would be the 5 basic steps, right? Well, in applied research, first one usually is out the window immediately because the research problem is going to be assigned to you by the contracting entity. So the ministry wants to know how it is, and they don't want to know everything else. So even if, let's say they want to know the prevalence of process addictions, they're not interested in how very interesting are the spatial dimensions of gambling sites. It might be interesting for me. They are never going to pay for me for that, so I would never try to convince them, hey, let's change the research problem. And the second one where you usually will get kind of interference is research design. More often than not, in tender, you will already be kind of instructed, we expect you to do interviews or we expect you to do some surveys. So you need to be aware of that and need to know how to work with it. So, because otherwise, if you just come and write your research proposal with completely different methods that they expected, you're probably just not getting the research. As I said, real quick over this one. You can ask questions later if you have. So, first method that I want to talk about is secondary data analysis. I use it here in a very, very broad sense. And what I mean with it is this analysis of existing data collected by others. What that means, that might mean a lot of things. Reading reports of other people, reading reports of your government, all this stuff. It might also, you could also call this rather, I think more appropriate name would be desk research, because secondary data analysis is a specific method. that we are not talking about here right now. Aha, I see I have a question. I will address it afterwards. Yes, here then, what are the benefits of carrying out the secondary data analysis? First one, it's cheap. You don't really need anything. You have a computer, you have internet, you can go to the library. Pretty much you have covered the secondary data analysis. You can get all your data and you can work through it. You don't need to go anywhere. You don't need to have even, you don't need to find research participants. You don't need to find research participants means you are this is quite, sorry, there's a mistake, quite unintrusive research. What that means is that you are not buggering people with your questions. This is again a thing to always think about when you're carrying out your research, these ethical propositions. Should I even bother people? Can I do it without bothering people? As anthropologists, we are predisposed thinking, oh, no, we need to go into the field. We need to research it. But always think about it also from research participants' perspective. Why should you take away their time? Why should you take away sometimes even their working time to talk to you if you could get that information without going to them? This is not to say that you don't need to do interviews or similar stuff, but that you need to be mindful if there is information that you can get in other ways, that's probably a good idea. In case of Ministry of Welfare research that we did for this, you see the long name. Yes, there, for example, to kind of develop indicators that would allow the state to evaluate how well they're doing in relation to support mechanisms for people with disabilities. Come on, there should be things happening, and they're not. Ah, yes, pictures. What we did, we looked at a lot of different indicators from other places. Such as these gold indicators from the Danish Institute for Human Rights. If you ever need to develop any kinds of indicators in relation to people with disabilities or similar topics, these I can wholeheartedly suggest. They are very good starting point. So we read about all that, we read about other places, and then we developed our own indicators, which we offered the Ministry of Welfare, and they have now implemented them and are using them to kind of evaluate how good are we doing compared to the previous years. So secondary data analysis, cheap, somewhat easy. You can't really get that much of deep or temporally near data because everything that's written is already old. Next one, quantitative methods. I talk about this one because sometimes people who come from anthropology studies, from anthropology field, are very skeptical about quantitative methods. They think everything is qualitative and we hate quantitative methods with passion. I would very discourage this type of thing because each method, each tool has a particular reason, particular way how you can apply it. And quantitative methods can allow you to answer questions that qualitative cannot, vice versa. In this case, when we think about prevalence of addictions in Latvian population, you can't really learn about prevalence of addictions in Latvian population with qualitative methods. There are no tools to do so, except countrywide field work where you talk to every single person. You can imagine why that is not a viable thing. In the meantime, surveying people, applying a statistical analysis, allows you to kind of gauge the levels, how many people are gambling, how many people are having problems. So that's why we implemented also survey in this particular case. And yes, this again is a comparatively quick method. It is very useful in triangulation. So for example, we do our research interviews. We learned that people who are gambling very often have other, let's say people who have complicated or problematic usage of social media. They usually have some, we learned that they usually have some previous mental health issues. That's very often the case in our research at least. But we don't know if that's the case always or only among our 11 research participants. And then quantitative methods allows us to kind of triangulate this data and see that, yeah, that is actually the case. So just think about when you need to use them, do not be afraid to use them, do not be afraid to ask for help from sociologists you yourself do not know them as well. And they are intrusive because somebody needs to go and do the surveying, but they're less intrusive than, for example, interviews. And here are an example of questions, how we did them and all that. And this, they're in Latvian, I didn't have time to translate them. But what I put them in to remind myself to tell you, If you have only worked with qualitative methods, quantitative ones might seem strange. The way they ask questions might seem strange. It seems wrong sometimes. And this is why I also invite you, again, as I said, attach some sociologist or someone who works with quantitative methods, because they will be able to tell you why they need to ask questions in such a strange way, like here, like, yeah, I don't know. I cannot imagine asking these questions that are here necessarily in interview in this way, because they are quite intrusive, but in survey, they kind of work. And then we come to interviews. I don't have a definition for interviews for the reason that everyone knows what an interview is, more or less. There's very few people now, at least in Latvia, who wouldn't know what you want to do if you said, I want to interview. That is one of the strong points about interviews. Your contracting entity probably knows what interviews are. People you contact to interview probably knows who interviews are. And therefore, it's easier for you to convince them that interviews are a good idea. At the same time, everyone knows what interviews are, but everyone has a different idea. Structured interviews, semi-structured interviews, unstructured interviews, journalist interviews, research interviews, different things. And sometimes when you go to a person, they think you're going to do a journalist type of interview. Sometimes they expect you to send the questions beforehand. Those of you who have worked in the field obviously know all of these things, but you know, if anyone didn't, then here it is. The data from interview is highly comparable. You know, interviews are the same. You have the same questions for all the people, similar to surveys. And so you can ask the same questions, even if in a different manner, if we talk about semi-structured, and then you can compare the answers and quote them, and information is quite easily accessible. Interviews in Latvian case will most likely already be expected. The contracting entities usually expect, at least they say some number of interviews that they expect you to do. And then you need to convince them that when you did the one interview where 3 people participated, that's actually 3 interviews. And sometimes you can convince them and sometimes you can't, and then you need to do more. They're relatively quick to do. The longest time usually goes to kind of find the people to interview. Don't be afraid to ask help from contracting entity here. Let's say when we needed to interview specialists, let's say social workers, etc. For the addiction project that I mentioned, we asked the Ministry of Health for help, and they could suggest people. Of course, this is a bit of a tricky situation because they might suggest not always the ones you need, so do keep that in mind. And they are slightly intrusive because, again, you need to find the person, you need to negotiate this time, you need to take time out of their lives, usually an hour or half an hour, and you just take it for your own good and don't really give anything back. So they are even more intrusive than surveys. And yes, in this violence project that I mentioned previously, we have done, how many was there? Some 140 interviews all around Latvia. And yes, we have got quite a nice data massive, and we have quite a good impression of how both violence prevention doesn't work in Latvia and where it does and for what reasons. So yeah, interviews certainly are the staple and the basic method that you are going to use as an applied researcher, as applied anthropological researcher. Those are some nice quotes, but I actually have only 10 minutes left. I am so sorry. Now, focus group discussion. Focus group discussion is a technique where a researcher assembles a group of individuals to discuss a specific topic. Reason for that being, if you interview people one-on-one, they sometimes are less likely to touch on certain topics. There are certain things that only come in group conversation, as we all know also from our daily lives, right? The good thing about focus group discussions are they are cheap and they are quick. You can get 7 people to talk about an issue. Instead of doing each separately, you have 7 people, 7 opinions, plus they are arguing with each other. What else might you want, right? It's an awesome data to get. It can also be used as an advocacy or participatory tool in the sense that you can bring together people from the field who have not met for them to be able to hear each other, because sometimes they never do. Let's say, not in this particular research that is mentioned here, but in other research, we have had the cases where NGOs and the state officials have been brought together, have discussed, have actually made links for the first time, actually talked face to face. And you can see how their communication gets so much better in that one discussion, and that really makes me happy at that time. But at the same time, it's important to remember that focus group discussions are rather intrusive. and they need to be managed very, very carefully, because especially if it is a touchy topic, people might get very, very angry, very, very high-spirited, and you need to be the one who moderates it and keeps everything in check. Yes, this is how a focus group usually happens. This is Ivita in the front carrying it out. So you have a bunch of people around the table. You ask the question, they answer, someone answers, someone argues, and you just keep getting data out of all that, and it's wonderful, and I really like it. Now the next one is participatory methods. To define participatory methods is complicated because they have been used in very different settings in very different ways around the world and in different fields. Therefore, if you go looking for participatory methods after that and you find a different definition, do not be alarmed. It's a complex thing. But the definition that I myself like, you can see on the screen right now. So yeah, it's basically you take methods from other fields, even from, let's say, psychological, actually from not even research, from methods simply from psychology, and you apply them in a research context, often by as well with local people. Participatory methods are the ones where you try to make people participate in the research, give their opinion, help you to design how the questions are going to look like, or carry out the research themselves. In this case, in this sense, I have worked a lot with SOS Children's Villages, where let's say the young people themselves have been the ones to carry out interviewing. The young people have been the ones, we have drawn things together in case where it's hard to kind of express it in words. There are different methods in particular how to do that. You can ask me later, I can send you some information how to do it. But the main part is that they should be participatory. They can really serve as a tool for advocacy and participation, because it allows people to really bring their voice in research, which is so much harder to do with any other methods. The problem is that it is very intrusive. You need to bring people, again, this is a group method. You need to bring people together. You need to force them to work to a particular topic. I say force, it's not like, you need to, it's just, I'm rushing, sorry. You need to kind of make sure they work well together. And they are less known, so sometimes you won't be able to convince contracting entity to participate or to fund these types of methods. As an example here, this we did in our violence project. We asked them to first identify what could be the obstacles for them to be able to have interagency cooperation. Then we asked what could be the solution. Then we asked, well, if you once they had identified what solutions are, what these solutions, have you seen any of these solutions? Have you seen any kind of these types of things already happening? And then what kind of resources would you need to actually do it? And this is great for us because we get all this data, both from the discussion, from the and from this material itself. And it's great for people themselves, for them to think of what are the actual solutions for their problems, how can they engage with that, and what could they do to improve. So it is kind of self-management inspired thing, and therefore a bit suspect, and I can understand the hesitancy, but in general, it's something that I really, really love, and I would be happy to talk about it more if I had the chance. Okay, and finally, Malinovsky, right? A participant observation, something that every anthropologist somewhat knows and expects to be doing all their lives. And then they go into applied research and learn that 9 times out of 10, they're not doing it. And they're not doing it because participant observation is very, very slow. It is, and by being very slow, it is very expensive. If you're spending 6 months into the field, and during these 6 months, you're spending 8 hours each day into the field, and you expect someone to pay you for these 8 hours, yeah, that's just not happening. In 9 times out of 10, nobody's going to be ready to fund that. There simply won't be money for that. And this is one of the reasons why participant observation is available only in very specific use cases. It is also the least known. In Latvia at least, people very often still don't know what participant observation is, which makes it, again, that much harder to convince people that we should be doing it. And finally, it is super intrusive. You go to people and say, hey, I am now going to pester you for next 6 months. We're cool with that, right? And however friendly we are, however happy we are. We need to remember that we are taking, again, time away from people. And this time, not only an hour from one day, we're taking away hour from day after day after day, or maybe several hours. So participant observation is a great tool. I love it, and I am happy every time I get to do it. Like when working with these people who are working with refugees, we got to help them move their furniture. So we moved their furniture and we talked about things and we ate pizza and everything was awesome, and we got data that we would never got otherwise. Now, we never got paid for it because no one really understands what that is. You can't really get paid for moving furniture unless you're getting paid for it as a, okay, sorry. But it is something to consider that you might do, not to the extent you learned at the university, not something you necessarily will get paid for, but it might still be a method you apply just to get better data. Yes, and that is a picture from one of our fieldworks. It has no particular meaning. It's just a nice cat picture at the end of a very long presentation. Thank you for your attention. Yeah, I don't know if I'm over time already, but I would like to answer the questions if I'm allowed now. Is it okay?
I think that's fine, and I think you shouldn't be worried about being over time, because we still have half an hour left according to our plan, and we took around 8 minutes from the beginning of your presentation. So, for example, I also feel if you would like to expand a bit more on participatory methods that you mentioned, that you would like to talk more about it, I feel that you still could do it for, at least 5 to 10 minutes, and then we could go on for the questions, or however you choose now.
I will, thank you. This is good to know. I will probably, I'm just writing things down. I will probably start with questions because I assume people have been waiting. And after that, I will talk a bit about participatory methods.
Sounds great.
Okay, so the first question is about, yes, if there are quite racist and other types of problematic people, how to deal with people like that? Yes, thank you, very good question. Here is the thing that helps me. I don't have a good methodological tool like do these 5 simple steps, but here are the things that help me. First thing to remember is that your research, you are there as a researcher, and your aim is to solve the particular problem that you want to solve, right? Let's say, in that case, I wanted to understand how prepared people are for helping refugees. Okay, what I got was that that particular nurse probably should not be working there, and she's definitely not prepared. And that is something I could write in my research report. Now, obviously, I couldn't write this exact nurse because anonymity, and it should be. But I could write a conclusion that some people in the whole system are rather unprepared. They don't know what they're doing, and they are very prejudiced. You need to have some kind of training for these types of people. You need to help them. This is the thing to remember. You will help way more by carrying out your research as it's intended, instead of getting really angry and starting to argue with them. Because arguing with them probably won't change their opinion, but you will lose any of that interview that you hope that you would get. So yeah, I probably take very deep breaths, I guess. Another reason to have water with you or something like that when you're doing the interview, so you can drink at the point where you want to scream at people. And yes, keep in mind that the research you do might help you to actually overcome this issue. Now, at the same time, if you are talking to a person who is being openly racist, that is one. If person is actually telling you of their plans to go and hurt people, if person is actually telling how they have hurt people, then depending on the legislation in the place where you are, you might have to report that. That depends on the country, depends on the whole situation, but be mindful that there might be situations where people are talking about things that you are supposed to go to law enforcement for. Of course, there's a huge ethical issue there, but it's just something to always keep in mind. Most times people wouldn't do that. That would be only if you would be researching very, very specific topics like white power movements or something like that. But yes, in these cases, then let's say, keep your eyes on the ball, remember why you're there, and remember to look at these things as data, because it really, really is that. It's horrible, it's mean, but it's still data. I hope that answers it at least. Gambling addiction. Have you collaborated with gambling companies to recruit for interviews? That was a very interesting experience. Gambling companies to recruit for interviews, no, because at least in Latvia, gambling companies don't really know their customers to be able to kind of give us, people with addictions or something like that. We did interview gambling association as such, and from there came another, actually a good lesson, so to say, for applied research to remember. If you want to interview any association or company or whatever, and they suggest that you should talk to their public relations specialist, try to convince them that you need anyone else, because public relations specialists are specializing in one thing, not telling you anything at all. I remember this interview. I didn't do it, my colleague did, but we talked about it later. They talked for 1.5 hours. She got nothing. There was just nothing from this addiction company, from this gambling association. He just keep talking around and about and how things are changing and how we should take different things into account, yada, yada, yada. Half an hour, 1.5 hour gone, and nothing has been said. So this is just a thing to remember when thinking about these types of people. Not people, but people with this profession. Again, there's no point of getting mad at them. That's what they're doing, therefore, that's their job. But it's important to remember that for research purposes, you should probably try to get some other people. Did we do a secondary analysis of the data collected by gambling companies? Well, they didn't give it to us. They did have their own research. We asked for it and we didn't get it because they obviously have no incentive to give it to us. Even if they have, because obviously the research might show that there's quite a lot of addiction prevalent, that addiction is quite prevalent, but there's nothing for them to gain to give it to us. So we got what we could out of them, but it wasn't much. I think in Latvia, I don't know, maybe gambling companies are better in other places, but in Latvia they're quite well managed and quite well versed in avoiding giving researchers what they want, unfortunately. Yeah, are there any more questions or stuff?
I would have a question. Is there any difference between working, like making a research project and carrying out a research for a governmental company versus carrying out a research for some kind of another kind of entity? And what are the things to consider for researchers when going for the other?
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Very good question. Yes, I'm just writing it down. Yeah, I would say the main difference would be for me, at least in my experience. Okay, limited experience, but private customers are usually more reasonable. As I was mentioned at the beginning of the presentation, state officials can get very, very hung up on details. While in in business setting, you explain, things moved around, something happened, and I have 26 interviews instead of 27, they might be cool with it. State official, in my experience, never. That is never going to be okay. You will always need to prove what went wrong, and they will be very suspicious of you forever after that. The next thing, on the other hand, what I have experienced is, especially if you work with ministries and you repeatedly, but this could apply also to private business, but very often in the ministries, there might work people who know what anthropology is, or some anthropologists might be working in ministries, as happens to be in Latvia. That is awesome, because then suddenly there's a person who actually understands what you are doing and what you can or cannot do. And that sometimes is very, very helpful. With private companies, less in my experience. And another thing that I really kind of see different is that state institutions, in my experience, almost never will try to do research themselves. They will ask you how to do it. They will ask you to do it. The businesses sometimes try to do it themselves, and then they want you to help them. That makes it a rather complex situation because very often they have rather vague notion of how to do research, and then you need to explain to them, no, we cannot ask a question where we already present an answer. That's not how you do things. And then they get mad. So sometimes it's better working with state, sometimes with the business. But yeah, these would be the differences, at least as I can now think of them.
Thank you.
It's nice
And
to
there
hear.
are,
yeah.
And there are more questions as well.
Yeah, I see a comment from Rita that in her example, that for her there have been some very awesome experience with international gambling companies, and that's so cool. I'm jealous of you. That's really nice to hear. And I do know, as we did also research on how this question is worked with in other countries. Let's say in Scandinavian countries, there is quite a better attitude to dealing with these issues. But in Latvia, unfortunately, that is not the case. Now, they will tell you that they are very committed to preventing addiction. They will tell you that they have a special funding for that. But as we found in our research, that funding doesn't really go anywhere, and these methods that they are applying are really ineffective, unfortunately. But I'm really happy to hear that other companies are nicer than that. Okay, and then there's a question from Agnes. So, if practice, is it important to keep yourself versatile? Yes, yes and no. And now the question from Agnes, if you don't see it, is about should you, and if I understand it correctly, should you try to specialize yourself in one line of research, or should you kind of branch out to as many as possible to get as many, be able to apply to as many projects as possible? Complicated question, a very good question though. I would say keeping yourself versatile is, to a certain extent, is the best way to go about it, and try to participate in as many researches as you can and in as varied research as you can. But I would say the specializing happens not necessarily intentionally. What I mean by that is, so I start with my research about refugees in Latvia, which is more or less into social health. At least in Latvia, it would be seen as public health research. Now, the next research I will be applying to will probably be public health research because I have experience in that. Once I'm done with the next research, I have even more experience in public health, and so it goes, and I'm now stuck in researching public health. Now, if you can branch out, I certainly invite you to. I would say that the best way probably to go about it is that you have your core topics that you really know, that you can write, a proposal about. You just see a tender and you're like, yep, I know all that needs to be written. It's good if you have your core topics that you really love and you really know. And then there is related stuff that you can also kind of branch out to if you're feeling adventurous. And once you are good and set and recognized as a researcher, then of course you can research literally everything, starting from phone companies and ending, with people with disabilities and everything in between. Yeah, something like that. Any more questions? If not, then I can talk a bit about those participatory methods, if everyone's okay with that. Can I get back in my presentation to the slide? Yes. So yeah, with participatory methods, the thing to remember, what I already kind of explained, but I would like to talk a bit more about, is that, the main goal is, in this definition, it's like these methods might be used with local people and often by local people, but this should always be the core of why you use participatory methods. You use them to help people also realize things, to help people organize themselves, to help people kind of get to the point where they couldn't without participating in this particular thing that you're doing. Therefore, participatory methods, although they can also be used to simply extract data from people, similar as interviews or surveys, they could be used and should be used, in my opinion, to kind of help research participants in more meaningful ways than other methods could. The other thing, as I wrote already on the slide, they are often used in youth setting. They are very, very useful in those settings where interviewing or surveying or something like that simply isn't possible. I don't know if you have ever tried interviewing 5-year-old, but that's not necessarily a thing you can do. It doesn't work the way it usually doesn't work the way you expected it to go. Of course, there are certain techniques and certain methods, but participatory methods can allow you to kind of overcome these limitations. So, for example, my colleague Aivita was researching, there is this NGO in Latvia, and they have this program where they try to teach children how to protect themselves from harm. So, you know, don't go with strangers, even if the stranger is a nice looking lady, you still shouldn't go with them. And, you know, things like that. And so Aivita needed to carry out evaluation, how these children learned how to protect themselves. And what she did was obviously not interviewing the children, you know, because that is silly from several aspects. First one, if you ask children, have you learned about how to protect yourselves? And they answer yes. That was a survey. There's no point for it, right? On the other hand, children won't understand the more complex questions or will answer them in a rather drawn out manner and will get tired rather quickly. Therefore, what she did, she used the method of community theater, meaning that they carried out scenes where children needed to play out what they should be doing. So someone was playing this old lady they should be going with, and would they go with the lady? Would they not go with the lady? After that, they were talking among themselves and also with the researcher how to deal with the situation. And no, going with lady is silly. And the other said, no, she's an old lady, she cannot do you anything. And all these discussions really help, first of all, to identify which points the training might have missed out on. And second, it helps you to kind of help the children themselves inform each other about the best practice, because you can also steer it in a particular direction by pointing out, yes, well, actually going with the old lady probably was not the right choice. So that is one example. Actually, if we talk about that, focus group discussions, as I mentioned, themselves can be sometimes seen as part of this participatory method. In our case, we use them for evaluation for this NGO Marta, where we were looking at how children are, whether children have learned whether children have learned from the training what they were supposed to be learning. So it was such a fascinating thing to do. We did a focus group discussion before, and children had such very strong views. They were children who had never been exposed to any information about gender equality or anything like that. So there was quite a lot of, women should stay at home. Sometimes they need to get beaten, the usual stuff. And having this focus group discussion afterwards, you could see that they had learned things. They had learned that no, actually hitting people despite a form of their genitals is not a good idea. And that they should, and they were also talking to each other and kind of correcting each other or explaining to each other why certain things are the way they are. It was a wonderful thing to see. So in that sense, focus group discussion also can be used, but it is a bit less participatory. There's less participation from research participants. Yeah, those things. I don't know. I guess that was what I really wanted to say about this as well. Yeah.
I was wondering, because a lot of the projects that you introduced, you've been carrying them out with the people from your department, and you were doing this since you were a student in Latvia, in the University of Latvia. And I was wondering if Latvian University is also offering some sort of a training or a course in application of anthropology, or I'm wondering how basically you're learning all of those methods, and is it something that you try to learn along the way, or learn by doing it with other professionals, or how is your group working?
Thank you. Yeah, so one thing that really helps in Latvian case, if you study anthropology in Latvia and at BA level, there is this course that you have to take that is called research practice. And it's called research practice, but it's basically applied research. And through this research project, these research projects come to be that I have now on the screen, right? These are the ones I now have supervised since I work at University of Latvia. But before that, while I was studying for my BA, I also participated in similar projects. And in these projects, then we learn about the practical research. And this course is very, very awesome. I think you can also go to it as a listener or something like that. You don't necessarily need to take the whole BA program, I think, but it is very, very useful. It really helps you to get into touch with how it actually happens. Sometimes we even get somebody to give us funding, and then it's even better. We haven't managed to do that for years now, but you know, maybe. Oh no, this we are now funding it from our Science Council project. So this really allows you to kind of get the general gist of how these things are going to happen. At the same time, very much of it is, as you said, learning by doing. Because one thing you can't really learn in these types of study courses, study projects, is the experience of going to meeting with the ministry, experience of going to meeting with your client, if it's not ministry, if it's NGO or whoever. That is the part that students usually don't get to experience, both not to discourage them from being anthropologists and also because those usually are a bit too high stakes to involve students in them. And that is something that you really learn only once you are into the field. Same as you only once you're into the field, you learn, you know, which ministries need what kind of approach and which research is the one where you probably are not trying to apply for. All these things you kind of learn by doing. Yeah.
Another thing that I also wanted to ask was, you were proposing that a good idea would be that to collaborate with fellow sociologists and people from other fields when doing certain kinds of research. And I see how it would be really beneficial in many cases. However, my question is, how do you actually carry that out? And if you have had some successful departmental or, you know, disciplinary collaborations, because what I see from Lithuanian universities very often is that, especially maybe in these recent years when there is such intense struggle for funding, departments are more in this, you know, not that friendly relationship, and instead of collaborating, they're actually struggling to get the funding to their side. So I was wondering how you're dealing in this situation at your side.
Thank you. Very good question. Yes, the situation is similar in Latvia, and there is a competition between faculties, between groups of people, between companies for research funding. That unfortunately is also here. Damn you, capitalism. But in our case, what we have is that in our study program, we also have a sociologist. We have sociologists on hand, so to say, because we think it's very important to also teach quantitative methods to our students, because they need to know how to work with them in case they need them. And we usually are working together with his company. So we are kind of in a kind of privileged situation. Nevertheless, working together with sociologists, even one which is kind of, you know, exposed to anthropology daily, it still sometimes is somewhat challenging when we need to figure out how much money will go to which thing and which is the important thing. Because there's some things still sometimes pop up. Do we need a bit bigger survey or do we need more interviews and all that? There still will be some kind of negotiating taking place in relation to these issues. But yeah, as an example, this study that I mentioned of the prevalence of process addictions in Latvian population and the contributing factors, this one was, as I said, we had a survey here, and we had both qualitative and quantitative methods here. And as I illustrated, it was very, very useful for both things, because also from advocacy point of view, this was a question that addiction research is one of the topics that I'm really interested in and I'm very passionate about. And so this was an important topic for me also to research. And for me, I was very happy that quantitative methods were there because we could show the desperation of people who had addiction experience. We could show how horrible gambling is, and in some cases for some people, and how hard their lives get afterwards. But just from interviews, that would go back to the favorite argument from our gambling association. Yes, but it's like 1 in 10,000. It doesn't really affect that many people. And that's why it was so important to get this quantitative data, which showed that among Baltic countries, we have way worse results. We have way more people who could be identified as having this type of addiction. We have also quite bad results compared to the rest of Europe. And this was very, very important. And this allows us to make our case that much more stronger by showing that no, these are not isolated cases. These are not simply morally bad actors or irresponsible people who cannot control themselves. But we can see a pattern and we can identify that there are certain aspects that then lead to these things happening. And so now we have seen that, for example, certain things that we hoped would be implemented now will be, such as opportunity for the person to ask to no longer be allowed in gambling halls. Of course, the fact that they have to ask for themselves not to be let in the gambling halls is an interesting thing, but about that we'll talk another time. But yeah, some other stuff we can see that they are now being implemented, and I think it is both because we had this really gut-wrenching stories that we could tell, and we had actual, numbers with showing, but it's not just 5 people, it's actually way more than that. Yeah.
I want to remind to our participants that you are free to ask a question or two. We still have some time. And I was wondering also, because you mentioned the stories, I was wondering if, or to what scope or to what extent are these results of your applied research being published? Like most of the times, I suppose, if it's governmental research, they have the obligation to show where the funding was being put in, where it was invested, and what are the results. And do you have any control of how these results that you find are being publicized and how they are distributed towards the wider population and towards the very people that you were talking with?
Yeah, I remember the funny story in relation to that, because actually this very same research in relation to refugees in Latvia, I am using it now in my ethics course to show how your research can be misrepresented, because that happens. Where what happens is that the Center for Disease Control, they announce that they have this research, that it has been carried out, and they give it to the press and whatever. And at least one of, I think it was Latvian version of Delphi, who just got out the most, bombastic statements that they could find from it, and the most, outrageous things, and to show that, oh my God, so horrible things are happening, such people are coming, and what you can do is obviously you can write a letter and say you need to retract some claims if there is anything that is completely fraudulent. But in this case, it isn't. They are just showing it in a particular manner. Now, that is a rather bad example, but for the most part, let's say if you are working for a company, obviously it stays within a company, no one else necessarily learns about it. If you're working with a state structure, they usually publish it at least on their own homepage. Sometimes they have public presentation, sometimes not. Case in point, for this prevalence of process addictions, we did not get public presentation. There was supposed to be one. It didn't happen. I am suspicious of why, but let's not go there. And another very good place where we get to present our applied research is in relation to these student research projects, where in the recent years we've had quite good collaboration with Latvian Talk Festival, or I don't know how to call it. It's a festival where people talk, called Lampa. And in this festival, we have in last 3 years, including this one, we have had a stage where we can present the results of our paper, of our research, and we usually get together some NGOs and some state actors. And we, like this year, we are going to be talking about COVID thingy. And we have people from Ministry of Welfare, we have from some NGOs who worked with these issues, and they will all be on the stage, and we will be able to talk to them what exactly our research tells them what they should be doing better. So that is the best case scenario. The worst case scenario is, yes, they decide they're not going to publish it at all, as is the case with process addiction research. And but in general, just today, actually, as I was reviewing all these researches, I saw that apparently I am still the copyright holder of any of these researches. So apparently I probably have some say of what happens. I didn't know that, so learn something new every day. Yeah.
Is this copyright holder thing something that you normally outline in the contract that you sign with the company you're working for, or is this some particular case?
I think it differs from case to case. I think in relation to state institutions, you usually are still the author. You still have kind of say about what's going on, but especially in relation to state institutions, they usually own the data. You might own the report because you wrote it, but the data will be owned by the actual place. Oh, and this is the thing that I didn't mention. It's great that we are talking about things, and I can remember to say another thing. You really need to kind of, in this early stage, when you are negotiating how exactly you're going to carry out the research, you already need to negotiate what happens to the data. How much you will need to give to your to the person or entity that is paying you to do the research. Will they need the recordings? Will they need the transcripts? How many? Do they need all of them? Can you not give them in? Because there's obviously ethical risks, and for the most part, we're trying to advocate for not sharing the recordings for obvious reasons. Transcripts, for the most part, would have to be submitted to show that it took place. But yeah, these things you need to negotiate at the beginning, because you will need to be able to, you always need to inform your research participant what exactly is going to happen. And if you yourself don't know, you obviously cannot tell your research participants nothing. So always remember at this very early stage to be clear of what kind of data they will need, and how, what kind of wiggle room you have to protect people if that is necessary. Yeah.
Is there, well, maybe one of the last questions, and sorry for so many of them, but is there some legal framework that helps you define what happens to the data and what data you should hand in to the organization paying for the research, and to what data you can kind of leave out in order to protect the identities of your participants? Not
that I know of. As far as I know, in Latvia, this whole thing is still quite gray. I mean, okay, there's GDPR, but it doesn't really apply in particular cases like these. So no, there isn't. I mean, Latvia doesn't really have Anthropology Board of Ethics. So yeah. What we usually do is we go through University Board of Ethics for medical research or something like that. And then that's the framework we're working with. But that is more to protect the institution and us than our research participants. So no, nothing like that here, unfortunately.
Because I was thinking that most universities in the UK and the US are asking even their students, when they are carrying out the research for graduate papers, undergraduate papers, to hand in also a legal document which shows an agreement by the research participant to participate in the research, and to and it shows also outlines also the ways the data is going to be used or not used. So
yeah, we
and
do.
However, in Lithuania, I know that we don't have that either.
Oh, you don't?
Sorry.
We are using these forms, you know, so people can sign and they have something, you know, to sue us if necessary. We at least usually have that. But there is no legal framework that would allow us to say, we're not going to give you recordings. That doesn't exist, and I don't think it ever will in Latvia. But at least we have this kinds of ethics forms and agreements and all that for the most part. Yeah.
Okay. Great. I think if the audience doesn't have any more questions, I think we might wrap it up, unless, or maybe you would like to say some final notes for those that are gonna, after this, jump into the field and go for some applied research.
As I said, what I was doing, I was telling you the small details, the complexities that come with research, and that whole thing might create you the impression that, oh my goodness, I'm never doing this, it's horrible and people are mean. That was not the intention, and I hope tomorrow's discussions will help you to get back into being high spirits about the whole endeavor. It is an awesome thing to do, and if you ever see your research actually making a difference, it is one of the most awesome experiences I've ever had. It's rare, but it sometimes happens, and it is a nice way to make money if you can, and I certainly encourage you to do so. Do always stay mindful how hard it might be. Do stay mindful that there might be obstacles, but they certainly are not unsurmountable, or whatever is the word. You can totally get across them or through them, depending on your character, and it is an awesome thing to do. Yeah.
Thanks very much. It was a really inspiring final note. And thanks very much for the entire presentation. I'm not sure about the others, but for me, there were quite a lot of new things and I think important things, because a lot of these really small details, as in, you know, trying to understand where the projects come and where they go when they die. I think these are kind of left unanswered when you're not yet there. And I think one of our goals of these events is to kind of facilitate and promote application of the science, of the social science, humanitarian sciences, and kind of bring a little bit more hope to the students, recent graduates or not recent graduates of the universities, which are often, I think, leaving the university and thinking like, so what is the point? Because, you know, we are living in such difficult and complicated times, and how can we do a difference? Because this is something that matters. So thank you very much. And if you have time, I think we will be looking forward to seeing you tomorrow. And we are also going to be hoping to see most, or at least some of you who participated today in tomorrow's panels as well. And we are starting a bit earlier with the presentation of Ekaterina Lavrinets, which will also last for 1.5 hours, and it's going to be a workshop sort of experience. And then we will continue on to a discussion between Ekaterina, Roberto Barrios, and Kristina Jonutytė. And this is going to be a bit of a loose framework where you're going to be very much invited to participate and voice your concerns and questions regarding activism and academia. So thank you very much all for today, and we're going to be seeing you tomorrow. Bye.
Bye.
Okay, I think I will just stop the meeting. Thank you very much, Artūrs. It was so interesting and so helpful.
Thank
really,
you.
really. So
okay.
You are not joining tomorrow for.
I don't know. We'll see, because we're rushing one research article. If I have time, I will, but otherwise I will be writing things and being mad at Carlos as usual. Sorry.
Okay.
Mhm.
So thank you once more,
Yeah.
and see you.
Okay, see ya. Bye.